Utah is a landlocked state in the Mountain West subregion of the western United States. It is one of the Four Corners states, sharing a border with Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. It also borders Wyoming to the northeast, Idaho to the north, and Nevada to the west. In comparison to all the U.S. states and territories, Utah, with a population of just over 3 million, is the 13th largest by area, the 30th most populous, and the 11th least densely populated. Urban development is mostly concentrated in two regions: the Wasatch Front in the north-central part of the state, which includes the state capital, Salt Lake City, and is home to roughly two-thirds of the population, and Washington County in the southwest, which has approximately 180,000 residents. Most of the western half of Utah lies in the Great Basin. Utah has been inhabited for thousands of years by various indigenous groups, such as the ancient Puebloans, the Navajo, and the Ute. The first Europeans to arrive, in the mid-16th century, were the Spanish. Because of the region's challenging geography and harsh climate, it only became a peripheral part of New Spain and later of Mexico. Even while it was Mexican territory, many of the Utah region's earliest European settlers were from the United States. Notable among these were Mormons who were fleeing marginalization and persecution in the United States and arrived via the so-called Mormon Trail. In 1848, after the Mexican-American War, the region was annexed by the U.S., becoming part of the Utah Territory, which included what later became Colorado and Nevada. Disputes between the dominant Mormon community and the federal government delayed Utah's admission as a state. In 1896, after it agreed to outlaw polygamy, it was admitted as the 45th state. People from Utah are known as Utahns. Slightly over half of all Utahns are Mormons, the vast majority of whom are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, which has its world headquarters in Salt Lake City. Utah is the only state where a majority of the population belongs to a single church. The LDS Church greatly influences Utah's culture, politics, and daily life, though since the 1990s the state has become more religiously diverse, as well as secular. Utah has a highly diversified economy, with major sectors including transportation, education, information technology and research, government services, mining, multi-level marketing, and tourism. Utah has been one of the fastest-growing states since 2000, with the 2020 U.S. Census confirming the fastest population growth in the nation since 2010. St. George was the fastest-growing metropolitan area in the United States from 2000 to 2005. It has the 12th highest median average income and the least income inequality of any U.S. state. Over time and influenced by climate change, droughts in Utah have been increasing in frequency and severity, putting a further strain on Utah's water security and impacting the state's economy. The name Utah derives from the name of the Ute tribe, meaning people of the mountains. However, no such word exists in the Utes language, and the Utes refer to themselves as Nichi. The meaning of Utes as the mountain people has been attributed to the neighboring Pueblo Indians, as well as to the Apache word Utahi, which means one that is higher up, or those that are higher up. In Spanish, it was pronounced Utah. Subsequently, English-speaking people may have adapted the word as Utah. History: Pre-Columbian. Thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans, the ancestral Puebloans and the Fremont people lived in what is now known as Utah, some of which spoke languages of the Uto-Aztecan group. Ancestral Pueblo peoples built their homes through excavations in mountains, and the Fremont people built houses of straw before disappearing from the region around the 15th century. Another group of Native Americans, the Navajo, settled in the region around the 18th century. In the mid-18th century, other Uto-Aztecan tribes, including the Goshute, the Paiute, the Shoshone, and the Ute people, also settled in the region. These 5 groups were present when the first European explorers arrived. Spanish exploration, 1540. The southern Utah region was explored by the Spanish in 1540, led by Francisco Vasquez de Coronado while looking for the legendary Cibola. A group led by two Catholic priests, sometimes called the Dominguez Escalante Expedition, left Santa Fe in 1776, hoping to find a route to the coast of California. The expedition traveled as far north as Utah Lake and encountered the native residents. The Spanish made further explorations in the region, but were not interested in colonizing the area because of its desert nature. In 1821, the year Mexico achieved its independence from Spain, the region became known as part of its territory of Alta California. European trappers and fur traders explored some areas of Utah in the early 19th century from Canada and the United States. The city of Provo, Utah, was named for one Etienne Provost, who visited the area in 1825. The city of Ogden, Utah, was named after Peter Skene Ogden, a Canadian explorer who traded furs in the Weber Valley. In late 1824, Jim Bridger became the first known English-speaking person to sight the Great Salt Lake. Due to the high salinity of its waters, he thought he had found the Pacific Ocean. He subsequently learned this body of water was a giant salt lake. After the discovery of the lake, hundreds of American and Canadian traders and trappers established trading posts in the region. In the 1830s, thousands of migrants traveling from the eastern United States to the American West began to make stops in the region of the Great Salt Lake, then known as Lake Utah. Latter-day Saint Settlement, 1847. Following the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, Brigham Young, as president of the Quorum of the 12, became the leader of the LDS Church in Nauvoo, Illinois. To address the growing conflicts between his people and their neighbors, Young agreed with Illinois Governor Thomas Ford in October 1845 that the Mormons would leave by the following year. Young and the first group of Mormon pioneers reached the Salt Lake Valley on July 24, 1847. Over the next 22 years, more than 70,000 pioneers crossed the plains and settled in Utah. For the first few years, Brigham Young and the thousands of early settlers of Salt Lake City struggled to survive. The arid desert land was deemed desirable by the Mormons as a place where they could practice their religion without harassment. Settlers buried 36 Native Americans in one grave after an outbreak of measles occurred during the winter of 1847. The first group of settlers brought 3 African slaves with them, making Utah the only place in the western United States to have African slavery. The 3 slaves, Green Flake, Harkley, and Oscar Crosby, came west with the first group of settlers in 1847. Utah was a Mexican territory when the first pioneers arrived in 1847. Early in the Mexican-American War in late 1846, the United States had taken control of New Mexico and California. The entire Southwest became U.S. territory upon the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, February 2, 1848. The treaty was ratified by the United States Senate on March 11th. Learning that California and New Mexico were applying for statehood, the settlers of the Utah area, originally having planned to petition for territorial status, applied for statehood with an ambitious plan for a state of Deseret. The Mormon settlements provided pioneers for other settlements in the West. Salt Lake City became the hub of a far-flung commonwealth of Mormon settlements. With new church converts coming from the East and around the world, church leaders often assigned groups of church members as missionaries to establish other settlements throughout the West. They developed irrigation to support fairly large pioneer populations along Utah's Wasatch Front, Salt Lake City, Bountiful and Weber Valley, and Provo and Utah Valley. Throughout the remainder of the 19th century, Mormon pioneers established hundreds of other settlements in Utah, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Wyoming, California, Canada, and Mexico, including in Las Vegas, Nevada, Franklin, Idaho, the first European settlement in Idaho, San Bernardino, California, Mesa, Arizona, Star Valley, Wyoming, and Carson Valley, Nevada. Prominent settlements in Utah included St. George, Logan, and Manti, where settlers completed the LDS Church's first 3 temples in Utah. Each started after but finished many years before the larger and better-known temple built in Salt Lake City was completed in 1893, as well as Parowan, Cedar City, Bluff, Moab, Vernal, Fillmore, which served as the territorial capital between 1850 and 1856, Nephi, Levon, Spanish Fork, Springville, Provo Bench, now Orem, Pleasant Grove, American Fork, Lehigh, Sandy, Murray, Jordan, Centerville, Farmington, Huntsville, Kaysville, Grantsville, Tooele, Roy, Brigham City, and many other smaller towns and settlements. Young had an expansionist view of the territory that he and the Mormon pioneers were settling, calling it Deseret, which according to the Book of Mormon was an ancient word for honeybee. This is symbolized by the beehive on the Utah flag and the state's motto, Industry. Utah Territory, 1850 to 1896. The Utah Territory was much smaller than the proposed state of Deseret, but it still contained all of the present states of Nevada and Utah, as well as pieces of modern Wyoming and Colorado. It was created with the Compromise of 1850, and Fillmore, named after President Millard Fillmore, was designated the capital. The territory was given the name Utah after the Ute tribe of Native Americans. Salt Lake City replaced Fillmore as the territorial capital in 1856. By 1850, there were around 100 Black people in the territory, the majority of whom were slaves. In Salt Lake County, 26 slaves were counted. In 1852, the territorial legislature passed the Act in Relation to Service and the Act for the Relief of Indian Slaves and Prisoners, formally legalizing slavery in the territory. Slavery was abolished in the territory during the Civil War. In 1850, Salt Lake City sent out a force known as the Nauvoo Legion and engaged the Timpanogos in the battle at Fort Utah. Disputes between the Mormon inhabitants and the U.S. government intensified due to the practice of plural marriage, or polygamy, among members of the LDS Church. The Mormons were still pushing for the establishment of a state of Deseret with the new borders of the Utah Territory. Most, if not all, of the members of the U.S. government opposed the polygamous practices of the Mormons. Members of the LDS Church were viewed as un-American and rebellious when news of their polygamous practices spread. In 1857, particularly heinous accusations of abdication of government and general immorality were leveled by former Associate Justice William W. Drummond, among others. The detailed reports of life in Utah caused the administration of James Buchanan to send a secret military expedition to Utah. When the supposed rebellion should be quelled, Alfred Cumming would take the place of Brigham Young as territorial governor. The resulting conflict is known as the Utah War, nicknamed Buchanan's Blunder by the Mormon leaders. In September 1857, about 120 American settlers of the Baker, Fancher wagon train, en route to California from Arkansas, were murdered by Utah Territorial Militia and some Paiute Native Americans in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Before troops led by Albert Sidney Johnston entered the territory, Brigham Young ordered all residents of Salt Lake City to evacuate southward to Utah Valley and send out the Nauvoo Legion to delay the government's advance. Although wagons and supplies were burned, eventually the troops arrived in 1858, and Young surrendered official control to Cumming, although most subsequent commentators claim that Young retained true power in the territory. A steady stream of governors appointed by the president quit the position, often citing the traditions of their supposed territorial government. By agreement with Young, Johnston established Camp Floyd, 40 miles, 60 kilometers, away from Salt Lake City to the southwest. Salt Lake City was the last link of the first transcontinental telegraph, completed in October 1861. Brigham Young was among the first to send a message, along with Abraham Lincoln and other officials. Because of the American Civil War, federal troops were pulled out of Utah Territory in 1861. This was a boon to the local economy as the army sold everything in camp for pennies on the dollar before marching back east to join the war. The territory was then left in LDS hands until Patrick E. Connor arrived with a regiment of California volunteers in 1862. Connor established Fort Douglas just 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, east of Salt Lake City and encouraged his people to discover mineral deposits to bring more non-Mormons into the territory. Minerals were discovered in Tooele County and miners began to flock to the territory. Beginning in 1865, Utah's Black Hawk War developed into the deadliest conflict in the territory's history. Chief Antonga Black Hawk died in 1870, but fights continued to break out until additional federal troops were sent in to suppress the Ghost Dance of 1872. The war is unique among Indian wars because it was a 3-way conflict, with mounted Timpanogos Utes led by Antonga Black Hawk fighting federal and LDS authorities. On May 10, 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was completed at Promontory Summit, north of the Great Salt Lake. The railroad brought increasing numbers of people into the territory, and several influential business people made fortunes there. During the 1870s and 1880s, laws were passed to punish polygamists due, in part, to stories from Utah. Notably, and Eliza Young, 10th wife to divorce Brigham Young, women's advocate, national lecturer, and author of Wife Number 19 or My Life of Bondage, and Fanny Stenhouse, author of Tell It All, My Life in Mormonism, testified to the happiness of the very early church members before polygamy. They independently published their books in 1875. These books and the lectures of and Eliza Young have been credited with the United States Congress's passage of anti-polygamy laws by newspapers throughout the United States, as recorded in the And Eliza Young Vindicator, a pamphlet which detailed Ms. Young's travels and warm reception throughout her lecture tour. T. B. H. Stenhouse, former Utah Mormon polygamist, a Mormon missionary for 13 years, and a Salt Lake City newspaper owner, finally left Utah and wrote The Rocky Mountain Saints. His book gives a witnessed account of life in Utah, both the good and the bad. He finally left Utah and Mormonism after financial ruin occurred when Brigham Young sent Stenhouse to relocate to Ogden, Utah, according to Stenhouse, to take over his thriving pro-Mormon Salt Lake Telegraph newspaper. In addition to these testimonies, the Confessions of John D. Lee, written by John D. Lee, alleged scapegoat for the Mountain Meadow Massacre, also came out in 1877. The corroborative testimonies coming out of Utah from Mormons and former Mormons influenced Congress and the people of the United States. In the 1890 manifesto, the LDS Church banned polygamy. When Utah applied for statehood again, it was accepted. One of the conditions for granting Utah statehood was that a ban on polygamy be written into the state constitution. This was a condition required of other Western states that were admitted into the Union later. Statehood was officially granted on January 4, 1896. 20th century to present. Beginning in the early 20th century, with the establishment of such national parks as Bryce Canyon National Park and Zion National Park, Utah became known for its natural beauty. Southern Utah became a popular filming spot for arid, rugged scenes featured in the popular mid-century Western film genre. From such films, most U.S. residents recognize such natural landmarks as Delicate Arch and the Mittens of Monument Valley. During the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, with the construction of the interstate highway system, accessibility to the southern scenic areas was made easier. Since the establishment of Alta Ski Area in 1939 and the subsequent development of several ski resorts in the state's mountains, Utah's skiing has become world-renowned. The dry, powdery snow of the Wasatch Range is considered some of the best skiing in the world. The state license plate once claimed the greatest snow on Earth. Salt Lake City won the bid for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games, and this served as a great boost to the economy. The ski resorts have increased in popularity, and many of the Olympic venues built along the Wasatch Front continue to be used for sporting events. Preparation for the Olympics spurred the development of the light rail system in the Salt Lake Valley, known as tracks, and the reconstruction of the freeway system around the city. In 1957, Utah created the Utah State Parks Commission with 4 parks. Today, Utah State Parks manages 43 parks and several undeveloped areas totaling over 95,000 acres, 380 square kilometers of land, and more than 1 million acres, 4,000 square kilometers of water. Utah state parks are scattered throughout Utah, from Bear Lake State Park at the Utah/Idaho border to Edge of the Cedars State Park Museum deep in the Four Corners region and everywhere in between. Utah State Parks is also home to the state's Off-Highway Vehicle Office, State Boating Office, and the Trails Program. During the late 20th century, the state grew quickly. In the 1970s, growth was phenomenal in the suburbs of the Wasatch Front. Sandy was one of the fastest-growing cities in the country at that time. Today, many areas of Utah continue to see boom-time growth. Northern Davis, southern and western Salt Lake, Summit, eastern Tooele, Utah, Wasatch, and Washington counties are all growing very quickly. Management of transportation and urbanization are major issues in politics, as development consumes agricultural land and wilderness areas, and transportation is a major reason for poor air quality in Utah. On March 18, 2020, Utah suffered a 5.7 magnitude earthquake originating 3.7 miles, 6.0 kilometers, northeast of Magna, near Salt Lake City. Thanks for watching. Please comment and subscribe if you enjoyed.